Welcome back to Theories of Knowledge, the first collaborative online course for Arts and Humanities doctoral students across Scotland, brought to you by the Scottish Graduate School for Arts and Humanities with support from the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Scottish Funding Council. Theories of Knowledge examines the ways in which philosophers and critical theorists have influenced and indeed continue to animate how we understand knowledge production within the arts and humanities. This evening, Dr. Robert Halsall will speak to us on the work of Peter Sloterdijk. Dr. Robert Halsall is Reader and Research Coordinator in Communication, Marketing, and Media at Robert Gordon University. His areas of research and teaching fall within the fields of cultural and critical theory, intercultural communication, semiotics, postmodern culture, and the aesthetics of media. He is author of The Problem of Autonomy in the works of Hermann Broch, out from Peter Lang in 2000. In addition to work on the Frankfurt School, Jürgen Habermas, and Peter Sloterdijk, Dr. Halsall has written extensively in the field of critical management studies, in which he applies critical discourse analysis to managerialism and neoliberalism. Tonight, Dr. Halsall will introduce us to the work of Peter Sloterdijk through the rubric of Ecologies. If you're joining us remotely this evening, please log into notheory.org and navigate to the Ecologies post on the discussion page to share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie, for that introduction, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Here in the room, it's Robert Gordon University, and tuning in to this course. As Katie said, I'm here to give a lecture on the work of Peter Sloterdijk in relation to theories of knowledge. Now, until a few years ago, giving a lecture on the works of Sloterdijk in the English-speaking world was quite a difficult undertaking because apart from a few works, very few of his works were available in translation. He's well known in his native Germany, and he's also quite well known in continental Europe, but the lack of translations meant really that he was not very well known in the UK. So this situation is beginning to be remedied now, as translations have appeared of many of his significant works, and more of these works are being translated at this moment. And it also is the case that scholars in the arts and humanities in the UK are increasingly beginning to apply his work to research in the arts, humanities, and the social sciences. To just mention a few fields which scholars have applied them to already: art and design, architecture, environmental planning, and organisation studies. These have been some studies which have appeared in the last few years. The task of giving an overview of Sloterdijk's work, however, is quite a difficult one, because he is the author of over 50 works. So in 1 hour I'm trying to give an overview of them. In addition to his published works, Sloterdijk is a high-profile media philosopher, particularly in Germany. And he is famous or infamous for certain public and polemical interventions, which I'll speak about in a few moments. In addition to that, he was a high-profile media celebrity, if you like, as a media philosopher. From 2002 to 2012, he was the host of a philosophical discussion program on ZDF, which is the second German television channel, and he has made many other very frequent media and public appearances. So in this lecture I'm going to restrict myself to what I see as the most important works relevant to the theory of knowledge. But before doing that, I'd just like to give an overview of the nature of Sloterdijk's work, its wide-ranging and interdisciplinary nature, speak about his style of philosophizing, because the question of his style is very much significant from the point of view of the content of his work, as I'll say in a moment. Just a bit of biographical background for those who are not familiar with him. Sloterdijk was born to a German mother and a Dutch father in 1947. He studied German literature, philosophy and history, and received his doctorate. in 1976, and that was a literary analysis of autobiographies in the Weimar Republic. From 1978 to 1980, he spent 2 years in India studying in the ashram of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. This is very significant for his work because one of the aspects of Sloterdijk's thought is his openness to non-Western perspectives, in particular Indian philosophy. He first came to prominence in Germany in 1983 with the publication of Kritik der cynnischen Vernunft, a critique of cynical reason, which became a bestseller, and which I'll deal with in detail in a moment. From 1992, he was Professor of Philosophy and Media Theory at the School of Art and Design in Karlsruhe, and he was also the rector of the art school from 2001 to 2015. Just to speak about influences on his thought, there are many influences on his thought, and one of the criticisms of Sloterdijk's work is that it is eclectic. I think, however, this is a misplaced critique, as the wide range of influences are very much part of his intention, which is to cross disciplines and call into question disciplinary boundaries. This makes things difficult for people who want to classify and pigeonhole theorists. What is Sloterdijk? Is he a philosopher, a cultural theorist, an anthropologist, a literary critic, polemicist? In fact, I believe that he is all of these things. In terms of influences on his thinking, if we were to highlight just a few, first of all, then Nietzsche and Heidegger would be of particular significance. Apart from two specific books, short books on Nietzsche, The Thinker on the Stage, 1986, and On the Improvement of the Good News, Nietzsche's Fifth Gospel, 2000, which was a speech given on the 100th anniversary of Nietzsche's death, references to Nietzsche occur through all of Sloterdijk's significant works like leitmotifs. And in particular, one of the chief concepts that he keeps coming back to is the idea of ressentiment, which Nietzsche employed in the genealogy of morality as part of his critique of religious morality. The nature of ressentiment and its prevalence in modernity has been the theme of particular works of Sloterdijk. For example, Contempt for the Masses, Essays on the Culture Wars, 2000, that hasn't been translated yet, and Rage and Time, which has been translated in 2010. The second major influence on his thought, second major concept from Nietzsche that animates his thought is asceticism. In particular, Nietzsche's view of religions, first and foremost Christianity, as systems of self-denial or withdrawal from the world, or to use the term ascesis. Sloterdijk shares with the later Foucault an interest in asceticism, both in its religious and non-religious forms. But in contrast to Nietzsche, Sloterdijk is not just concerned with what Nietzsche saw as the pathological aspects of asceticism, but its cultural significance for human systems of exercise and discipline, what he calls in his 2013 work, You Must Change Your Life, Anthropotechnics. I'm not going to talk in detail about that book, but I'll just mention that as an example of his influence of Nietzsche. So in this work and other works, he follows in the tradition of Pierre Hadot's studies of spiritual exercises in ancient Greece and the later works of Foucault, such as The Care of the Self and the Hermeneutics of the Subject. So he shares that interest in asceticism. The other major influence on Sloterdijk's work is Heidegger, whose ambivalent and for some fatally tarnished reputation has of course been a subject of controversy both within Germany and the rest of Europe. Sloterdijk's critical engagement with Heidegger is collected in the essay volume Not Saved, Essays on Heidegger, 2001. As the title of the book implies, it's not an attempt to save Heidegger from this reputation, but to bring out certain aspects of Heidegger's thought which inspire Sloterdijk's own. In particular, Heidegger's relationship with spatiality and place, which are key inspirations for Sloterdijk's Spheres trilogy, which I will speak about in more detail later. In Heidegger's Being and Time, in the existential analytic of Dasein's being in the world, space is an important, if underdeveloped, aspect of existence in comparison to time. In Heidegger's later works, that analysis of space and place is extended. Sloterdijk's aim in the Spheres trilogy, as he says in its introduction, is to develop this concern with space further to the extent that spheres can be seen as a complement, being and space, to Heidegger's Being and Time. Next slide. The third major influence on Sloterdijk's thought, on which I'll not elaborate in detail, but I will mention, is the tradition of philosophical anthropology, particularly in the work of Max Scheler, Helmut Plessner, and Arnold Gehlen. For these theorists, following on from Nietzsche, the human being is characterized by an existential duality. On the one hand, situated in the world, and at the same time able to detach from it, able to withdraw from it, and to see him or herself as a thing among other things, and then to be able to return to the world, or to use an important Sloterdijkian metaphor, to be born to the world. There is a book, Sloterdijk's, which has that in the title. So philosophical anthropology is very much an influence on his works. Just to mention two in particular, I mentioned Spheres trilogy, but Weltfremdheit, Unworldliness, 1993, that hasn't been translated as yet, is a key work from the point of view of this idea of coming to the world. Okay, finally, before I start talk about the individual works, this is the next slide, a bit of a comment about his style. He is very critical of the dry academic style of which some academic philosophy consists. As with Nietzsche, Sloterdijk often adopts a literary, metaphorical, and in some places apodictic style. He often writes in a deliberately provocative and polemical way, which has often embroiled him in controversy in Germany, as I'll mention in a moment. The style and the tone of his works, however, I think are an essential part of the nature of his thought, which is to question accepted truths and to ignore disciplinary boundaries. As the translator of Sloterdijk's Spheres trilogy into English, Wieland Hoban, remarks on his essay on Sloterdijk's style in the volume Sloterdijk Now, he says, to look at a text by Sloterdijk is not the same kind of thing as to look at a text by Habermas or Axel Honneth. He is highly metaphorical, has a literary style, and this leads some critics to dismiss him as a mere essayist. Many of the chapter titles of his books are deliberately cryptic and colourful, and many of the works, particularly Critique of Cynical Reason and Spheres, employ illustrations. The slide shows 2 pages here from the left from Critique of Cynical Reason and right from volume 1 of Spheres. So illustrations, works of art, those kind of things, you can find a lot of those things, illustrations, within his works. Okay, so these illustrations are meant to amplify, to evoke and provoke the reader to make connections beyond just the written word. Just to finish these comments on his style, these critical comments should not prevent us, however, I think, from engaging with his ideas. But perhaps, as Wieland Hoban says, philosophical precision and depth are not equally pronounced in all areas of his work. Although the works that I'm going to talk about tonight, I think, are amongst the most significant works of Sloterdijk. Let's come back to his public profile. As I said, he's a high-profile intellectual in Germany, and that is a country in which intellectuals still play a prominent role in the media, often commenting on political events. His interventions in the public sphere have often been seen as provocations and have generated controversy. Let me just mention two examples of that. In 1999, Sloterdijk gave a speech entitled Rules for the Human Zoo, which consisted of a reply to Heidegger's Letter on Humanism. Letter on Humanism was published in 1947. In the course of this, which muses on the nature of humanism in the late 20th century, particularly on the decline in humanistic education and the increased ability to manipulate the human genome, Sloterdijk appeared to some to be suggesting a use of genetics as part of the, quote, taming of the human species alluded to in the title of the speech. Such a suggestion, if that is what Sloterdijk was attempting to do, is of course an extremely sensitive subject in Germany, and that speech evoked a strong reaction from other intellectuals in Germany, particularly Jürgen Habermas, Ernst Tugendhat, and Manfred Frank, all published articles attacking Sloterdijk and accusing Sloterdijk of advocating a liberal eugenics. In reply to that, Sloterdijk published an article entitled Critical Theory is Dead, in which he accused his critics, particularly Habermas, of demonizing him, misconstruing his arguments and conducting a media campaign against him. He related this to the dead tradition of Frankfurt School critical theory, which he saw as a force controlling and stifling intellectual debate in post-war Germany. The second case, which I'd like to mention, is in June 2009. He wrote an article for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung entitled Die Revolution der gebenden Hand, the Revolution of the Giving Hand, in which he appeared to advocate or to attack one of the fundamental pillars of post-war Germany's social market economy, the right of the state to levy tax in order to redistribute wealth to the less off, which many in Germany see as a means of ensuring a stable social democracy. This intervention also provoked responses from other leading German intellectuals, including Axel Honneth, who is the present director of the Frankfurt School of Social Research. In citing these examples of controversy, I don't want to go into further into the nature of the debates and nor the importance of media in it, but to point out that Sloterdijk has a provocative and polemical element to his thought, and that for some in Germany, his apparent willingness to take positions in order to court controversy discounts him from being considered a serious philosopher. I do not think we need to come to this conclusion, even though we may disagree with the stances he has taken. Okay, I'd like now to move on to talk about the particular works of Sloterdijk, which I am going to talk about this evening. And as I said, we've got 50 works to deal with. I'm going to concentrate on two of his more significant works. The first is Critique of Cynical Reason, which I've already mentioned, and the second one will be the Spheres trilogy. So if we can have the next slide. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, thanks. Okay, right. Critique of Cynical Reason, as I said, was written in 1983. This is the beginning of his career. And Spheres, volumes 1 to 3, were published in 1998 to 2004 in Germany. Now, the translations which you can see on the slide, Critique of Cynical Reason has been available for some time, and the 3 volumes of Spheres, Bubbles, Globes, and Forms, the first 2 have already appeared in translation, and the third, Forms, is going to appear, I believe, in October. And I'm also going to be mentioning in the World Interior of Capital, which is really a kind of supplement, if you like, to volume 2 of Spheres, because it deals with macro-spherology. Yeah. Okay, let's start off with talking about Critique of Cynical Reason. This is seen by many people as the most significant and successful work of Sloterdijk. The title, of course, alludes to, as you have no doubt mentioned in previous lectures on this course of theories of knowledge, to the critiques produced by Kant, in particular the critique of pure reason. Kant's critiques were concerned with the possibilities of knowledge, whether of the external world through the senses and reason, moral knowledge and aesthetic knowledge. Sloterdijk's critique of cynical reason is also concerned with knowledge, in particular the possibilities of critical knowledge and ideological critique, given the changes in the world which had taken place in the later 20th century. To that extent, I think you can see a parallel with works such as Lyotard's The Postmodern Condition, 1979, or Jameson's Postmodernism or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, 1991. In contrast to these works, however, Sloterdijk does not employ the word postmodern. He is, however, analysing a particular point in history and politics, and that is the demise and disillusionment of the promise which many people had seen in the 1968 student revolts and the generation of critical thinkers associated with that, in particular in Germany, the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. Just two of the most important elements of that critique, stemming from the work of Marx and then continued in Adorno and Horkheimer's dialectic of enlightenment, are false consciousness and reification. False consciousness postulates that the subject is naive. What they take to be social reality, their understanding of the world, is an illusion brought about by ideology, a failure to recognize the truth of the situation brought about by the ideology of capitalism. It is this illusion, this naivety about naivety, which the critique of critical theory is designed to enlighten the subject about. Similarly, reification, the idea that the human subject is reduced to a thing, a commodity, is something which ideology critique is supposed to bring to the consciousness of the subject. So implicit in these two views, then, is that the subject does not know what they do. To quote Marx's famous dictum, they do not know it, but they are doing it. The analysis of cynicism in Sloterdijk's critique of cynical reason, however, is ultimately more indebted to Nietzsche than Marx. As Andreas Huyssen says in the introduction to the English translation, it focuses not on reification through the commodity form, but on reification of self and other in presumably enlightened discourse practices. Sloterdijk, in other words, is more concerned with the consciousness and knowledge of the participants in cultural discourse than with the structures of production or consumption of culture as such. The consciousness which has emerged in the late 20th century, as Sloterdijk argues, is not naive, not ignorant of its own state of illusion, but aware of it and cynical about the process of enlightenment and ideology critique. And Sloterdijk defines this prevalent form of cynicism as enlightened false consciousness. So just a quotation from Critique of Cynical Reason. Cynicism is enlightened false consciousness. It is that modernized, unhappy consciousness on which enlightenment has labored, both successfully and in vain. It has learned lessons in enlightenment, but it has not, probably, and was not able to put them into practice. Well off and miserable at the same time, this consciousness no longer feels affected by any critique of ideology. Its falseness is already reflexively buffered. End of quotation. So, Sloterdijk's project is to examine the epistemological and psychological nature of this reflexively buffered, enlightened false consciousness in contemporary cultural discourse, and to examine how the cynic uses awareness gained from the process of enlightenment to turn this awareness against the aims of enlightenment itself. Just to give a kind of parallel some of the ideas that Sloterdijk is talking about in the book, there are two kind of features of enlightenment which are subject to critique in the book. First of all is the ideal of consensus, and the idea that participants in enlightenment dialogue supposedly voluntarily subscribe to consensus as an outcome of the project. So, for instance, in Habermas's theory of communicative action, which is produced around the same time as this, 1984, the ideal of consensus as the outcome of dialogue is what that is all about. Yeah. Okay. So, in this respect, then, Sloterdijk, I think, is continuing in the line of Adorno and Horkheimer's dialectic of enlightenment, but he's definitely not subscribing himself to the project of critical theory. I think you can also see a parallel between this idea and what Lyotard is looking at in the postmodern condition, which is a skepticism about narratives of emancipation. Okay, can I just mention a few examples of where this kind of critique of cynicism has been applied in various fields? In the fields of media and communication, cultural studies, politics, management and organizational studies has been applied, for instance, to consumers of media products in the field of advertising and the consumer themselves, how a kind of enlightened false consciousness is part of the consumption process. In politics, the analysis of political cynicism, cynicism of voters about politicians, political parties. Timothy Bewes, in his Cynicism and Postmodernity, has a substantial to say on that. And in management and organizational studies, which is the area I have written on, Peter Fleming and Andre Spicer's 2003 article, Working at a Cynical Distance, talks about how employees in organizations become cynical about management and the management communication process. All three of those areas as examples of where Sloterdijk's insight have been looked at. But there is another aspect, an important aspect of the critique of cynical reason, and that is to counterbalance perhaps this pessimistic analysis of cynicism as enlightened false consciousness. Sloterdijk contrasts this with a second form of cynicism, which is still able to fulfill a critical function, which he refers to, this is the next slide, which he refers to by its original Greek name, cynicism, as practiced by its originator, Diogenes of Sinope. So you have on the left there, Diogenes as pictured in Raphael's School of Athens. Cynicism is a gestural critique, a critique which uses the tools of cheek, mockery and irony for the purpose of critique. It is essentially existential, bodily, and is directed at showing rather than arguing for the falseness of official ideologies. The slide, a picture on the left, right there is Diogenes going through the marketplace in Athens with a lantern in broad daylight looking for honest men. That's because there aren't any there. So that's the reason he's looking for them in daylight. Okay, so that is an example of the kind of bodily, cheeky, ironic kind of critique which Sloterdijk is calling cynicism. So it is a kind of embodied critique in the person, which is really going against the prevailing ideologies, as in the case of that. Excuse me a second. Yeah. Okay. Can I just talk about the second aspect of cynical critique? Cynicism, then, is in contrast to the high theory of critical theory and enlightenment, is low theory. In some respects, it is connected to the Bakhtin's notion of the carnivalesque, and the elements of the carnivalesque and the cynical have been identified by various theorists as prevalent in aspects of contemporary culture, including subcultural style and fashion, hedonism, enjoyment and pleasure. However, Sloterdijk emphasizes that cynicism uses cheek, mockery and irony for a moral and even a political purpose. A question for cultural studies is whether those cultural forms contemporary cultural forms which are, might have a clinical content are truly clinical in that sense, or have they become disconnected from any kind of moral or political purpose? Okay, just finishing off on critique of cynical reason then, it appears then that the book is a critique or a rejection of Enlightenment reason, and in particular a counterpole to the work of someone like Habermas's theory of communicative action, which, as I said, that work has an emphasis on the ideals of consensus, deliberation, and rationality. Critique of cynical reason can also, however, I think, be seen as an attempt to save this tradition of critique and the idea of dialogue. As Sloterdijk says in the introduction of the book, I'll just read this quotation here, it is tempting to poke fun at the methodological anti-realism of the dialogue idea, and part of this book, indeed, tries to help the derisive laughter about every form of foolish idealism. However, when all contradictions have been taken into account, one will return here to the beginning, of course, with a consciousness that has gone through all the hells of realism. To preserve this healing fiction of a free dialogue is one of the last tasks of philosophy. Okay, I'd like now to move on to the Spheres trilogy, which is going to be the main section of what I'm going to be talking about. So we do take a leap forward now in terms of time from the early 1980s to the late 90s and early 2000s, and we come to what many people regard as his magnum opus, the Spheres trilogy. There is, however, a connection between Critique of Cynical Reason and Spheres, in the sense that if the first book was a critique of the possibilities of knowledge in the modern world, then Spheres is also, has as its heart a form of human knowledge, and that is the human knowledge of space. Just to go back to Kant for a moment, of course, in the Critique of Pure Reason, for Kant, space was one of the two modes of experiencing the world, along with time. But for Kant and for Descartes, Leibniz and Newton, what they understand as space, which human beings have knowledge, is an abstract geometrical space, not really space as experienced, a phenomenon experienced by human beings in concrete environments. What Edward Casey, in his book The Fate of Place, calls emplacement. It is not until the 20th century, with the advent of phenomenology in the work of Husserl and Heidegger, and later in the work of Bachelard and Hermann Schmitz, that space as experienced and lived in becomes the focus of philosophical inquiry. The fundamental importance of space to human beings is, as I said earlier, present in Heidegger's Being and Time. So the idea that Heidegger puts forward there is that human spatiality comes not from a Cartesian subject being suspended in objectively presented space, but we are ontologically part of being in the world. We cannot deny that, and that being in the world consists of making space relevant for us, of being concerned with space by means of the processes which Heidegger calls directing and disseverance, bringing things close to us and making things further away from us. So these procedures are the way that human beings turn space, human space, into place, or as Sloterdijk is going to call them, into spheres, by bringing near to us what is distant and by lending significance to that which is close to us. The second element of phenomenology which we need to understand the Spheres trilogy, is the idea of the fluid boundary between the inside, the feeling of nearness and intimacy, which comes, for instance, in the dwelling or the familiar place, and the outside, the feeling of vastness, unfamiliarity associated with places outside this familiar environment. Here, the poetics of imagination play a vital role in mediating the nature of space. I mentioned Bachelard's Poetics of Space here, because for Bachelard, inside and outside are not opposites in geometrical space, but complementary in the imaginative space of the poet. Bachelard, for instance, looks at the work of Rilke and Baudelaire and others, showing how these kind of spatial categories merge in this way. Yeah. So the idea that the boundaries between the inside or the interior and the exterior are constantly evolving, merging, that is one of the fundamental insights from which the Spheres trilogy is going to be departing from. Okay, I'd like to go on now to talk about what the sphere is, and I'm talking now about volume 1 of Spheres, which is bubbles. As I said, I think this is an extension of the phenomenological project of Heidegger, Bachelard, Schmitz and others, this is the basis of the Spheres trilogy. Let me just first of all cite his definition of what is a sphere. This is from volume 1, page 45. What is here termed a sphere is, first, in a first and provisional understanding, an orb in two halves, polarized and differentiated from the start, yet nevertheless intimately joined, subjective and subject to experience, a biune, shared space of present and past experience. End of quotation. First, the sphere is an orb, a circular enclosed shape. It's an interior space. It's differentiated from the exterior by means of thin walls. It is subjectivized, meaning that the experiences of its inhabitants give it meaning, an atmosphere or a climate. It's inhabited by at least two people. In other words, this is an extension of what Heidegger in Being and Time calls Mitsein, being with others. If we move on, look at the next slide, please. We have two examples here which actually occur in volume 1 of Spheres. On the left-hand side, you have a panel from Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, and if you can focus just on the bubble there, which appears in the bottom right-hand corner, that illustration is an example which he uses in the book of human beings being enclosed in a bubble. Interestingly enough, that there were two people in it, but it looks like the man is being expelled from that bubble there, and that's the temporary nature of the sphere as a residence. Okay, spheres are what Sloterdijk calls morpho-immunological constructs, or temporary pacts against exteriority. This means, and this is a vital insight, I think, for the topic of ecologies, that, a quotation here, human beings have never lived in a direct relationship with nature. Our relationship with the external world, in other words, is always mediated by spheres. Spaces become spheres, he says, because, quote, human beings have given them form, content, extension, and relative duration. Okay, the sphere in its elementary form can take any dimension from that of the dwelling, locality, to the nation, and indeed the whole world, as we're going to see in a moment when we talk about macro spherology. Spheres, or bubbles in this case, are of varying size and duration, and they combine to form forms, which are the subject of the third volume. So the sphere, the bubble, is innately unstable. It is damned to burst, he says. The modes of bursting are brought about by new themes, new presences, new media. The illustration from Masaccio's expulsion from Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. So the Garden of Eden is a kind of bubble which they have been expelled from, and from the expressions on their face you can see that they're being propelled out into the exterior world, and this is not a pleasant experience for them. So I think that gives the idea that even paradise is a temporary sphere to which the walls at some point are going to be punctured here. Okay, let me move on now to volume 2, which is globes. So volume 1, Bubbles, is what he calls microspherology. So we are talking about small-scale spheres there. But in volume 2, we move from microspherology to macrospherology. What globes, in fact, is, in essence, is a history and phenomenology of what we usually call globalization. So, but Sloterdijk's history of globalization, however, is not written from a sociological or economic perspective, which most contemporary theories of globalization are, and of which Sloterdijk is critical, but from a phenomenological perspective, in particular, how people have pictured the world. Representations of the world through globes, orbs, etc. There are many illustrations from the book in this. A key text here for understanding Sloterdijk's thought is Heidegger's essay, The Age of the World Picture. Just to quote one sentence from that, Heidegger says, "The fundamental event of the modern age is the conquest of the world as picture," or image, if you want to translate it that way. What this means then is that actually what is important here is the world grasped as an idea, as a picture, and the volume 2, Globes, is really a history of that process of human picturing of the world from ancient times to the present day. However, if Heidegger emphasizes that this picturing began in modernity, Sloterdijk thinks it goes back further than that, and so going back before the age of terrestrial exploration to metaphysics of the Greeks and in the medieval period to see how people have pictured the world in those areas. Yeah. So what he does in volume 2 then is this history of imagining the world as a sphere in its cosmological, ontological and ultimately metaphysical dimensions. This is what Globes is all about. Yeah? And this is an important paradigm shift, if you like, to the idea that globality and globalization is not just a construction of geographical knowledge gained through travel, or not just construction due to the contemporary interconnected nature of communication media, such as in McLuhan's concept of the global village, but a product of this morpho-immunological conception of the world as sphere. To give an illustration of that, if we could move on to the next slide, I just want to talk about a very interesting passage of Sloterdijk's Globes, which is his exploration of Dante's Inferno. You've got Botticelli's depiction there of Inferno as a kind of conical inverted structure with the 9 circles of hell going down, and on the right hand side there's a contrast there between that and heaven as presented in Botticini's The Assumption of the Virgin. So in fact, in terms of spherology, hell is an exact opposite, an exact complement to heaven in that aspect. I missed out purgatory, by the way, which comes in the middle. But what in Sloterdijk's exploration of Dante's Inferno, this is what he calls an anti-sphere. This defined as withdrawal from the world sphere, and of course within Dante's medieval religious cosmos, that position is determined by metaphysical beliefs, sin, etc. But Sloterdijk is more interested in the morphological structure of this sphere called hell. I mean, for instance, Dante's Inferno, it has its own cities, such as the city of Dis in cantos 7 to 9, which Sloterdijk points out has a mature urbanistic structure with guilt-specific arrondissements. And at the lowest point of hell, next slide please, is the figure of Satan, who is kind of suspended there. This is Gustave Doré's illustration of it, and Sloterdijk sees this as the epitomization of sphere withdrawal and world deprivation. And he sees this kind of all-round isolation, which is characterized by the figure of Satan, as a characterization of the depressive position. So he's sort of seeing, extrapolating, if you like, out from Dante's macrospherology to a kind of modern condition of this kind of idea of sphere withdrawal. Could I just move on to the next concept now, which is, let's go forward to the present day, and I'm going to speak briefly about the book, The World Interior of Capital. This is published as a separate book, but it really is a development of his work on globalization in part 2 in Globes. That is actually published as a separate book. In the extract which I've circulated before, I've extracted one chapter from that called The Crystal Palace, and I'll speak about that in a moment. So, the world interior of capital then is the central, the Crystal Palace is the central metaphor in the world interior of capital, which is an understanding of how the macrosphere of the world has been transformed by expanded horizons of travel, mobility, consumerism, and the world market. The precursor of some of the ideas in the world interior of capital is Walter Benjamin. In the Arcades project, Benjamin develops the idea of the interior. So, characteristic of commodity fetishism in the 19th century, as exemplified in the domestic bourgeois interior, and then its extension in the Paris arcades, department stores, museums, and then in the Crystal Palace in London, 1851. And this process is a gradual process through which the external world is gradually enclosed under glass, and goods and curiosities are displayed for the contemplation and wonderment of the masses. So the interior in Benjamin's Arcades project became the place of collection of the exotic, where artifacts from distant cultures and different times were displayed for contemplation. Okay, so this process of expansion of the interior outwards and the interiorization of the world found its highest form in the world exhibitions such as that held in the Crystal Palace in 1851. Okay, so the idea of a vast transparent shell in which it appeared the whole world could be accommodated, this feeling of being inside a kind of world interior of capital is something which then Sloterdijk develops in the book to a critique of the contemporary market and capitalist order from the point of view of this kind of interior forming context. Okay, let me just see how I'm getting on here. Right. But there is another view of the Crystal Palace which Sloterdijk discusses in that chapter, and that is by Dostoevsky. In Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky, by the way, himself visited the Crystal Palace, but he found it the complete opposite of a kind of utopian space. He saw it as a dystopian nightmare in which all the questions which made human existence meaningful had been measured, predicted, put under glass, and therefore, for him, made meaningless. In discussing contemporary equivalents of this, if we could move on to the next slide, the idea that we are living in a world interior of capital which immunizes the inhabitants against the unpleasantness, unpredictability and threats of the exterior, but in so doing, in some way, compromises its inhabitants, impoverishes them, This is the idea. If we look at the spaces now which are prevalent throughout the world, here are some examples of indoor mega shopping centres in Dubai. These are what George Ritzer calls the temples of consumption. So these would be examples, if you like, of macrospherology, where the idea is to bring the entire world, as far as possible, into the horizon of consumption, etc. Those are the kind of spaces in which Sloterdijk is talking about in the book. However, we need to be aware that the interior always excludes an exterior. And this includes people who perhaps do not share the living conditions or security of the inhabitants of the Crystal Palace. And since Sloterdijk wrote the book, I think we can see plenty of evidence of its relevance to the present day situation, where there may be many people excluded from the Crystal Palace, from the interior, who, when they try to come into it, to enter it, to become part of that, then walls, fences, etc. are put up in some way to keep them out. So I think this shows the importance of the kind of reflections which Sloterdijk is putting forward in the world interior of capital. Okay, I just want to talk a bit about now the third volume of Spheres, which is Forms. Now, this hasn't yet been published in English. According to the publisher's website, it is due to come out in October. Actually, you maybe have sympathy with the translator of these works because they're some 700 to 800 pages per volume, so that's quite a major undertaking. So that volume is due to come out in October. So I'm just going to give you a preview of that and give you some passages using my translation. The only passage from it which has appeared in English so far was the passage I circulated in advance, which is Form City, which has appeared in New Geographies. Okay, what are forms? We've talked about microspherology and macrospherology. Forms, and the subtitle of the book is Plural Spherology. This is Sloterdijk's central metaphor for how microspheres, or bubbles, combine, interact, and communicate with each other and relate to macrospheres. In other words, this is what sociologists call society. And I'm just translating from page 59 of the German version, which is my translation here. Society can be understood as an aggregate of microspheres, pairs, households, places, associations of differing format, which border one another like the individual bubbles in a pile of foam, and which are layered over and under one another without either being accessible for each other or being able to be effectively separated from one another. So, as the metaphor, that's the end of the quotation, as the metaphor implies, foam is in a constant state of flux as the bubbles combine, burst, and the cells are in a constant motion of imitation and differentiation from each other. There's a key work of influence on volume 3, and that is the French sociologist Gabriel Tarde, who in his 1903 work, The Laws of Imitation, so this is a quotation from Tarde, the social being, in which in the degree that he is social, he is equally imitative, and that imitation plays a role in societies analogous to that of heredity in organic life, or to that of vibration amongst inorganic bodies. So what you've got going on within plural spherology, or form, is a constant dialectic, if you like, of imitation and differentiation. At the one hand, we've got spheres which are trying to become this is the next slide, the slide we got up there is The Birth of Venus by Botticelli, and she is The Birth of Venus from foam. That is an illustration which appears in in volume 3 of Spheres. So these tendencies within the plural spherology then, on the one hand, you've got the tendency towards forming monads, self-contained spheres cut off. Sloterdijk here uses Leibniz's term from the monadology. A monad is a kind of self-contained world which is a kind of cut off from others. And on the other hand, you've got processes of imitation and communication with other cells. And cells form themselves into neighborhoods and cities, as you can see in the chapter, form city, just quotation from that, systems of asymmetrical neighborhoods of medium size between intimacy glass houses and self-contained worlds. Form is half transparent, half opaque. Every situation in form can be understood as a combination of circumspection and blindness with respect to one's own bubble. So no bubble is absolutely isolated from the others. There is always this process of imitation and communication between bubbles. Sloterdijk, in a very typical provocative metaphor, refers to Joseph Beuys's famous sentence about every individual being an artist. Sloterdijk says, every individual is not just an artist, but an installation artist. The spheres of form city, then, are reflections of the tendencies in spheres to immunize and separate on the one hand, and to imitate, communicate, and assemble into larger spheres on the other hand. And I just want to mention, in the last 5 minutes or so, one section of the book, and that, I think, is the next slide. On the left-hand side, you've got mediated egosphere, which is M.C. Escher's picture of self-portrait in a spherical mirror. So the idea of this microsphere entirely as a projection of the ego of the person who's reflected in that. That's one polarity, if you like, of plural spherology, and the other polarity we're going to speak about in a moment. Yeah, we've already seen examples in volume 2 in the Crystal Palace, or what he calls Comfort Glass House, of one type of island, if you like, an anthropogenic island. What these are, in effect, are places or topoi, or how human activities tend towards place formation. And Sloterdijk categorizes these anthropogenic islands, as he calls them, giving you some examples there. Keratope is the field of operation of the human hands, i.e. touch. Phonotope is the sound container which people inhabit. Uterotope, extension of motherly feelings. Thermotope, which is the taking advantage of herd formations. Ergotope, fatherly or priestly power of definition, including a sensus communis of decorum. Erototope, which is transmission of erotic energies. And aliotope, through which a learning group constitutes itself as part of an experiential continuum. Thanotope, which is the space generated by the ancestors, dead spirits or gods. They reveal themselves. And nomotope, in which inhabitants bind themselves to each other through common customs or manners. I just want to talk about one of those, which is the phonotope. And this is the idea that the sound profile of a locality, in some sense, defines what that place is. So he refers to settlements which emit their own sounds, soundscapes of an individual character, filled with the sounds of life produced by their members, sounds of work, the clatter of appliances and tools, and the murmuring which must accompany all our perceptions. It's that kind of a bubble, if you like, space bubble, which consists of sound, is what he means by phonotope. So I think I'm just about ready to come to the end now. Okay, I'd just like to make a few concluding remarks before opening this to questions. I hope in this lecture to have made the case for the contribution of Sloterdijk's work to a theory of knowledge, which might underpin research motivated by the theme of ecologies. Spheres in particular is a major work which addresses the theme of human beings' essential in-placement, being in the world, relationships with the environment and others, the processes of habitation, and a reciprocal relationship of these with this environment. Sloterdijk, I think, has given us a concept, sphere, and a method, spherology, which is with its constituent elements such as immunization, interior and exterior, atmosphere, climate, and anthropogenic islands, which can be applied to a variety of fields. And this application has already begun in fields such as media and communication, organizational studies, art and design, architecture, politics, and others. As I have said, Sloterdijk's work is characterized by a style, breadth, and purposeful disrespect for academic boundaries, which may make it difficult to accept for some and difficult to interpret in some respects. But for a cross-disciplinary approach to knowledge in the arts and humanities, which has been the aim of this course, I believe it can be a productive resource. Thank you.